It's the Adventuring Party for the 4th week of February 2022. This week, do you want to hear the party discuss Gygax's original DMG? You might want to skip the first 7 minutes. We had to discuss fonts for some reason. The Adventuring Party, discussing tabletop and radio gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Savage Mick.
And I thought we were in a smoking room.
Oh hell, I forgot about the smoking room. Hold on, wait, get out of the party room. Come with me, come through here. We put in sounds of doors closing and people running down corridors and things like that. Just verisimilitude and all that kind of stuff. Right, yeah, sit down, just pull up the seat. Okay, mind the rug. Welcome back to the smoking room, companions. I'm Savage Mick.
And I am Warlord Scarr, fresh from yet more pillaging and mass slaughter.
Yes, please don't wipe blood on the rug, Warlord.
Well, that's what we've got a red rug for.
Okay, pull yourself in a bit close to the fire so we can smell that awful toast as you warm your iron-shod war shoes and relax. All right, we've done the bit then. Okay, everyone good? Everyone sitting down? How about you folks at home? Are you all sitting down? You all taking it easy?
No, they're out doing their, you go out jogging when you podcast, right? That's
true.
That's what all these responsible young millennial adults are doing, is, getting their cardio in.
Should we start jogging while we record the podcast?
No, that would ruin the immersion.
Fair enough. Okay. Anyways, crackling fire, wingback leather chairs, etc., etc. Tomes of Gygax. It's another Tomes episode. I mean, who would have thought we'd do one so soon? But yeah, we're back. We actually took a fairly big break from this over the Christmas period, so we're sitting back down now. It's nearly the end of January, and we're hours left in January at this point, and we're going to pick up where we left off, which was probably the heart and soul of this Dungeon Master's Guide, a section that simply says, "The Adventure."
What about the digression?
Okay, but first I'll digress. We had a question earlier in the week on the Discord. We have a Discord, come and find us, check the show notes for a link. Where Scar posed this question. Weird plot twist. Matt Covell, in his latest Patreon zine, claims that First Ed was fonted with Courier and not Futura. Any response, I was asked. Because I gushed in a previous episode over how lovely Futura was and how well it suited DMG. It's a nice clear font to lay everything out in. Or typeface, whichever you prefer. Font family. And I kind of scratched my head and went, oh no, have I blundered? I mean, this is Matt Covell we're talking about. Esteemed D&D person and owner of a beard.
Quite possibly launching his third Kickstarter at the time this episode comes out.
Quite possibly. Also, the world's foremost expert on Pink Floyd. And who did he do recently? End of last year, he did.
Was it not Tool?
Okay. I've forgotten now, damn it. It was very good. I caught bits of it. But anyway, it was very good. These are not VODs that are not available anymore. You had to be there, like Woodstock. Or Tomes of Gygax episodes. Okay, so we did a bit of investigation because, as you might recall, I am working from a based PDF, which I bought from DriveThruRPG.
That's weird. I'm working from a cringe PDF. Da. Bing.
No. The Warlord, on his conquest, managed to pick up an OG in-print Dead Tree original copy. Is it a first edition?
It's not. It appears to be the original edition, not the. There was a second printing of the 1A DMG with more wizards on the cover as opposed to naked people. So I believe this is an OG. So
it's set, and we have established before the show. Scar sent me a picture, and I was able to visually confirm with my Mark 1 eyeball that his copy is indeed set in Futura, as is the PDF I'm reading. So it ain't that. So we're not really sure where Mr. Colville is coming from on this one.
I have the suspicion he's thinking about certain adventure modules. So now we took a look at some famous adventure modules that I happen to have the Goodman's Games reprints of, Temple of Elemental Evil and Keep on the Borderlands. But the according to Savage's discerning eye, those appear to be other versions of Futura or Helvetica, or some kind of souvenir, I believe you called it.
Souvenir, and lovely font, folks. If you've ever been to a county fair, the program for it was probably set in Souvenir. It's one of the friendliest fonts out there. Check it out.
So we're not sure which adventure module is giving Gygax. It's possible that the PHB was in a different typeset than the DMG, but they were produced 2 years apart or something. So it's possible.
Anything could happen. And now Courier is, if your GM has ever handed you a handout that looks like it came out of an old typewriter, you're probably looking at Courier. That's that font. Or you'll find it in things like Notepad, I think. But yeah, it is a fairly distinctive font in its own right, but definitely not what we're looking at here. Anyways, that's the digression over.
So once again, we've proven Matt Colville wrong.
the hack.
So yes, anyway, I think that maybe the introduction will have to move people on to the actual meat of this.
The adventure. We're up to page 47.
Yes, we're on page 47 of the DMG, and yes, so we finally got into the part about running adventures, or it's not much about a narrative structure here, it is very much about the process of moving around a space. Various different types of spaces, in fact, and in various means of movement. Do we want to just jump into the text, or do you want to digress even more to talk about the page 48 full page?
No. I'm going to space out my digressions, but I will get to that. But he does start just with... It's linked to this, in fact, because we go straight to you're going to need a map.
Yes. It is... sorry, I think I would need to read these two paragraphs, because the language of them is just very... proscriptive, I think is the term. It is necessary to have a reasonably well-detailed large-scale map for conducting adventures outdoors. Naturally, the initial adventuring in the campaign will be those in the small community and nearby underground maze. For whatever reason, player desire, quest, or Gygax, because of your own direction, adventuring will, sooner or later, move to the outdoors. What you must do to handle this is not difficult, following the general procedures given below. First, decide how you wish to proceed regarding the world at large. If you have plenty of time and ideas, you should design a continent, or a large portion thereof, which perfectly meshes with your initial setting. If this is not possible, obtain one of the commercially available milieu, and place the starting point of your campaign somewhere within this already created world. At the risk of being accused of being self-serving, I will mention, parenthetically, that my own World of Greyhawk, published by TSR, was specifically designed to allow for insertion of such beginning milieu. A variety being great, and history and organisation left purposely sketchy to make interfacing a simple matter. So there's a lot of necessary, naturally, will, should... I don't want to harp on Gygax's, big bombastic tone, but there's an awful lot of this is the only way to do it energy.
Yeah, there's lots of energy here. Also, we've had milieu twice, and this is the plural of milieu. So if you're playing the drinking game at home, folks, bottoms up. Lovely Guinness this evening. Okay, I'm kind of... Yeah, sure, he's got stuff to plug. But I'm drawn to that little snippet there in the second sentence. Naturally, the initial adventuring in the campaign will be those in the small community and nearby underground maze. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Can we reach for the starter box? It's a trope because it bloody well works. Put them in a village, make sure there's something underground to explore nearby, get them to level 5. Or level 3, depending. It's as true today as it was back then.
It is, but also, I'm pretty sure Gygax explicitly created that trope when he noticed that sales of basic D&D were really high, so he took out someone else's original adventure Into the Unknown and put in Keep on the Borderlands as the starter adventure for that. And then, of course, he did the same again later on with Village of Hamlet, which is considered the AD&D classic of this, where it is literally a well-done art, hyper-detailed community where everyone keeps their, socks full of gold coins behind the bed, lists out in exhaustive detail, and then there's an underground maze, half a mile outside of town. So this is very much Gygax's go-to way of doing it, where you get to level. You start off with a town and a dungeon with like 1 or 2 levels. Get the players up to level 2 or 3, and then presumably they will just naturally start looking around for more dungeons because that's where you get your gold and your XP. So it is Gygax's wheelhouse, but is it fair for him to put so much that's the correct way to do it energy into this?
Well, it aligns with a lot of popular sort of GM world building advice today. What he's describing is essentially the first step in a spiral campaign. You begin in the locality, you move out a little bit, nearby wilderness, and then you go from there. I mean, where you go from there is up to you, but it ain't a bad start. It's like putting primer down the canvas. It's generally considered a good idea. It's quaint, it's charming, and it works really, really well. So, there's other ways into an adventure, into a campaign. But it definitely sort of, it encapsulates that kind of, it takes a village to raise a murder hobo idea that kind of sits at the heart of a lot of good sort of sword and sorcery adventures. So yeah, as ever, prescriptive, but look, it's Gygax, it's his book. He's laying out virgin turf here. He's allowed to say which way it grows.
I don't have any problem with saying that this is, a way of doing it, or that it is a good method to do it. I would generally agree, but also I'm painfully aware that's not generally my style. I tend to be when I make a setting for one of my own games, I tend to think very outside in, and then that's just me. Like, I'm not expecting him to debate the merits, but I don't know. It's just, it's more of Gygax's habit to present his way of doing things as the only real avenue to get anything done, and he's got a point, but it's a point worth noting. It's
Pioneers often write very directive maps that might it'll show you the way they got there, not necessarily the way you might get there. But they are pioneers, and they do have to map it.
But yes, we start from our you've definitely got a starter village, right? You've definitely hex mapped out the entire 100 miles around that village, right? Where he starts getting into the nitty gritty of, do you measure your 5-mile hexes by the side of the hex, or the measurement from one hex to another, one side of the hex to the other? Is it diagonals or face-to-face 5-mile hexes? It's a
conundrum, certainly. Good mapping software will take care of this, folks. Now, this is, of course, as you say, this is a point where perhaps modern practice diverges. I think what's interesting here is that he has started with Spiral and moved straight over to Hex Crawl, and those would be considered 2 different approaches now. But for Gary, it was like, you use all these tools. Why wouldn't you? There's been schisms all the way along in the D&D fraternity. And really, if you go back to the text, you find actually he wasn't saying do it this way or that way. He's saying do all of it. It serves different purposes. The whole hex mapping thing can be a bit exhaustive, I guess. But he liked to run those sandboxy games where they might go anywhere.
Then we get into our various types of adventures, starting with land adventures. So it starts off with, your random how to space out your random encounters, with a chance of encounter determined by the population density of the region that the hex is, and the frequency of how often you check depends on what the terrain type is. So a desert, you only check at morning and at night, but if it's forest, you check like six times every 24 hours. And with a slight note here that if the party is over 100 creatures, then you check 6 times for every terrain. As I say, there's logistics involved, and sometimes you're marching your army. Although, how many encounters are going to matter when you're marching your army is another thing. But then again, the original Monster Manual had some pretty wild numbers appearing for various things. So you could find there was not rules, but the heavy suggestion that your random encounters weren't just finding goblins; you were finding tribes of goblins on the march.
Probably recruit them or trade with them.
Yeah, that's always an option.
Or slaughter them all. Use them for kindling. I hear goblins are getting rework now in this Monsters of the Multiverse. So we're going to have to be friends with them or something. They're going to be Fae. Did you hear that one? No, that's true. You heard it here.
Well, no, I remember there's now Fae goblins. I'm not sure they're replacing.
No, that their origins of goblins will be that they're Fae and driven out of the Feywild, hobgoblins and all that kind of crack. That's beside the point, however. We'll save that for the next episode where we give out ad nauseum about 5th Ed. So, it's frequency, yeah. Travel in packs less than 100. Good advice. Too big an entourage and you're going to be crippled with the salaries. See previous episode.
Yeah.
So what else? Okay, he outlines some procedure for how to do it. Fine. Kind of dry. And then when an actual meeting does occur, consult the explanations accompanying the table for any special procedures to follow. Attempts by the encountering party to evade are dealt with under combat, pursuit, and evasion of pursuit. Okay, we look forward to that.
There's notes on how far away do you notice someone. Again, I'm terrible at map of figuring out the difference between map inches to map scale.
If your maps are 20 to 40 miles per hexagon, I mean, presumably you could 2 large groups could pass right by each other and never have any notion. Intervening terrain, if nothing else, would obscure them.
Well, that's part of the chance to encounter thing, I suppose. But yeah, it is relatively realistic in this. It's not just, Final Fantasy where you go squish and you're in a battle with 1d10 goblins. It's like, it says, for example, like, if the monsters are intelligent and would normally deem themselves to be weaker than the party adventurers, then they will always seek to avoid such confrontation. So even though you've technically had an encounter, the very first thing that happened may be that they just turn around and walk off the other direction, saying, we don't want... those look like adventurers, we don't want anything to do with them.
Bit of a simulationist sort of thing. Generally, nothing happens. If we simulate the entire universe at any point in time, pick a random point, you find that generally nothing's really happening. Should our games be like that, though?
Yeah, there's this sort of, like, I get the idea of, like, some encounters will just be flavor or a passing person with a flute who will play you a jaunty tune and then walk on. That's not a terrible idea, but you do have to really weigh up, like, is it worth having dozens of dice rolls as you travel, 20 miles to this old castle, which apparently is a dungeon under it. Like, how many dice rolls are worth it to simulate your barren wasteland in the ruins of the Shattered Empire or whatever? You definitely want to give the impression of, like, different parts of the map are differently dangerous or have different people in them, but there's the question of, like, you should really marry your procedure to how likely it's going to cause a difference in things.
Yeah, like so many other things in the game, I think you do have to bend things towards the narrative. And if you've got a map and your players can see it, then it's probably as points of interest. And it's at those points of interest they'll gravitate towards, and probably where things should happen. I mean, the hobbits and Strider didn't get to Weathertop and just spend the night and then move on. It was a distinct location they were trying for, and the stakes are raised when they're ambushed. There's all sorts of, or they're come upon, they're set upon by the wraiths. So, these aren't accidents. These are points where the story flexes. And the whole sort of procedural stuff is a little dry for me. I don't think there's, as you say, dozens of dice rolls.
Like, I don't have a problem with this sort of, confrontation distance thing if it would be streamlined somewhere. Well, what I do have a problem with is the next section, which is the Becoming a Lost section, where it kind of brings back the ideas of mapping. I think we had a previous episode on exploration and like the idea that the player is supposed to come up with their own map, but then if they mess up their navigation of a space, the GM is encouraged to just sort of lie to them about where they are on the map and then chuckle when they realize that they have 14 pages of inked mapping that is completely useless because, they made a mistake 10 days ago.
Oh, what fun.
It's doubly problematic when it's, just a random chance, as described in this section, where, like, as soon as you start out for the day, you go, the GM rolls a d10, and each type of terrain has a different chance of making you lost. Even plains, nice little flat plain has a 1 in 10 chance of you just being, like, off by 60 degrees from where you think you're going. And just you think you're going to 1 hex, but you're actually a hex over. And yeah, there's more dice rolling and more sort of advice to just sort of let them get lost because that's interesting or something.
Well, it is if you make it interesting. So let's just probably leave it there. Now, if I may, backtrack just a little bit. Let's have a look at page 48, which is a full page illustration, one of very few in the book. Full page, that is, plenty of illustrations smattered around. I wanted to draw your attention to this one. It is, how would we describe it? An encounter between what looks like some sort of female druid and a party of a couple of hoplites, a couple of old age pensioners in the bathrobes, and a very nervous looking horse.
That horse is just does not want to be here.
No, it's like, are you sure we should do this, mate? I think the horse might be the smartest member of the party.
Can I just say that the all the characters in this picture do not. I'm not sure they're all drawn by the same artist. If I wasn't aware of how hard it was to Photoshop stuff back in 1974, was it 1981, I believe. I would be really worried like if they got 5 different artists to make 5 different characters and put them all into this one background, because just like at the very least the two wizards do not look like they're drawn by the same person.
Oh, I don't know. I think they look like exactly the same person. Like, there's what does a wizard look like? A guy in a robe and a very scruffy hat. Okay, we need 2 wizards in the scene. What will the other one look like? Slightly shorter guy in a robe and a very scruffy hat. Not much of the old character design there. But I think you'll soften your cough towards this artist in a moment when I tell you a little bit more about them. So this one caught my eye anyways. I kind of like it. It has this sort of Renaissance Arcadian sort of look to it. There's a great deal of detail invested in the foliage, the trees. They're standing by a pond, and there's lots of different bits of vegetation. And down in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll find the name of the artist inscribed, which is Darlene. So this is Darlene Peckul, or Peckle, I don't know. I mean, this is a perfectly nice picture, but she is better known to all of you grognards out there as the person who created the map for Greyhawk. And it was that map that it was her initial map that all the Greyhawk publications worked from until they kind of scrapped publishing Greyhawk stuff with 4th Ed. So she did a few more bits and pieces. The map's definitely her greatest legacy in the realm of fantasy illustration. She went on to become a graphic designer and worked on occult books, things like that. Herself and Gygax collaborated again later on after he'd been kicked out of TSR, and she did other bits and pieces for him.
The Darlene map is very infamous in Greyhawk among Greyhawk fans. It was for, as I say, like 20, 30 years, the definitive map of the entire setting. There was a Dungeon magazine map in like one of those like super large, like split over 4 issues, 4-fold map in like 2004, 2005. Right now, the definitive Greyhawk map, as far as I know, is on the site of one artist, Anna B. Mayer, Meyer. And she has multiple multiple maps, taking elements from all the different adventures and sort of inserting, well, let's assume that this, and this is true. Where are all these adventures? Like stuff like the 5e Salt Marsh stuff has, added a whole bunch of extra details of the small Salt Marsh region and that sort of thing.
So yeah, she's the one who came up with the hex map, the full color map. That was the basis for a lot of what followed after on.
I just feel like that one wizard in the middle of the book has got 3 times the scruffiness of the other wizard.
So I suspect you're not entirely wrong. Not that it's a different artist or anything, but that it may be a bit of a cut and paste. Because while Photoshop wasn't really available or a thing at the time, I mean, the techniques you use in Photoshop are techniques that were developed when working with paste and paper and things like that. So this wizard may have been copied in from another. It doesn't have any feet, does he? You can see the feet of all the other characters that are standing right beside him, but it's very sketchy on feet.
All those nice armoured socks.
Yeah. Anyway, that's that picture. I thought we'd give it a moment because it's a full colour black and white, and I think there's lots to recommend it. It is of its time and well executed for what it is. Very sketchy looking horse.
Speaking of horses, probably the thing that is making that horse so worried is the forced movement chart, which explains exactly how likely a horse is to drop dead if the PCs decide they're going to rush.
Oh yes, we're back on track then. That kind of brings the end of land movement, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's relatively short section. None of the real in-depth hex crawling procedures you'll see in a modern OSR blog. Again, it's written with the assumption that, people just see it's obvious what happens when you have hexes on your map, and it's just like, well, obviously we'll go this way, we'll go that way, and it's just clear. Gygax doesn't belabor the point of the procedure. He just gives his interpretation of, how you lay out your random encounters and movement rates, and the rest is apparently obvious.
Clear as day. Clear as the way forward.
Well, not if you're in a forest where you have a 70% chance of getting lost every day.
Well, I mean, if it's a sort of a primeval forest, I could well believe it.
I don't see any option. I don't really see option for a properly farmed forest. Let's not dwell too much on it. We're into an interesting thing of next, which is the aerial movement section, which is sort of by necessity turns into a how to raise griffins simulator.
Does, doesn't it? At length. So this, what should probably be talking to us about how to move through the air or navigation a lot across distance over the air, very quickly goes to, griffins are kind of bad-tempered, and hippogriffs are not as difficult to train, pegasi are really fast. I think, okay, it's the field guide to flying horses.
I don't want to say this feels very Lisa's Pony, but Gygax is not really interested in in indulging the fantasy of, I'm the great paladin. I have, my friendly Pegasus who will take me everywhere. Gygax, if anything, Gygax loves logistical challenges.
How to train your griffin kind of thing. Do you want to read it? It's a good paragraph, and it does a good bit of world building, I feel, without necessarily being any use where it is. Crack into it. I like it.
Okay. Most flying mounts will either be griffins, hippogriffs, or pegasi. All these should be very difficult to acquire and even harder to train. None of these types will mix with the others. Griffins will eat pegasi or hippogriffs if given a chance, and hippogriffs, confined with pegasi, will bullyrag them whenever possible. Griffins are often nasty and bad-tempered. If captured when very young and trained, however, they can become fiercely loyal mounts. Their loyalty is non-transferable once fixed, so they must be disciplined and trained solely by the intended rider. The griffin must be trained and exercised by its owner on a fairly regular basis while it is a fledgling up to 6 months of age, in order to accustom it to his or her presence and the bridle, blanket, sandal, etc. When the griffin is half grown, a period of intense training must begin, which will last at least 4 months. Daily routine must never be broken for more than 2 days, or the griffin's wild nature will assert itself, and all progress will be lost. It's like how if you leave a Klingon alone too long, their natural instincts will cause them to pull out a bat'leth and start stabbing people. After 2 months of intense training, it will be possible to begin to fly the Griffin. This will be a period of training for mount and the owner alike, as the rider must learn how to deal with a new dimension, and he will probably have no teacher but himself. This is probably the first time there hasn't been he or she. Imagine the confusing tumult of giant wings, the rush of air, the sudden change in altitude, and you will realise when an experienced rider absolutely cannot handle a flying mount.
Certainly paints a picture, doesn't it? Suggests a rich backstory for an adventurer and their loyal Griffin. Of course, probably completely useless for your adventuring party unless you're going to hand out 4 to 6 baby Griffins at a go.
It's this idea of, well, go back to the previous episode and its big talk about time. The idea that sometimes if someone really wants something, then clearly they're if they really want this baby Griffin, then clearly they're willing to have their character spend 6 months, 8 months, 6 months of intense Griffin training just to get their Griffin mount.
So it's 6 months. So you gotta train them as they're growing in the first 6 months, and then you've got to spend intense training for another 4 months, which presumably is like every couple of days at the very least. Yeah, daily routine must never be broken for more than 2 days. So that's it. You're out for a year.
Yeah, and first off, that's very much. Oh, you have to have built your castle. See previous episodes. You need to already have built your castle, and presumably the stables for this horrible beast. Which you will point out that you need like 300 to 600 gold pieces of horse meat every month just to feed the dang thing. Which really, just the process involved. Like, realistic, sure. And so you could argue that it is ample motivation for, getting your nest egg to build your Griffin nest for your Griffin egg beforehand. But then you got to take out, your character's got to take this year off to train this thing so that, like, once or twice the campaign, he's going to fly off and, have a very short fight with a dragon who will just tear the Griffin to shreds because it's only like 5 hit dice or whatever.
Yeah, it's a lovely backstory. Probably a great sort of thing to hang an NPC off, but probably not actionable for your party. But anyway, classic Gygax.
This and similar things for the Hippogriff and Pegasi, who are nicer but still require an awful lot of logistics.
Oh wow, flying mounts. I'm glancing past the rest, but flying mounts must rest 1 hour for each 3-day fly. And they may never fly more than 9 hours a day. That's pretty good. Like, we require twice as much rest as we do effort. So these things are a good investment if you can get hold of one. This brings us, of course, to, and it's not just travel though, this brings us, of course, to aerial combat, which also is a section. This
is actually one of those ones that takes up an awful lot of space because basically every flying monster in the Monster Manual needs to now suddenly be given its maneuverability class and aerial movement speed, so that a proper aerial combat pseudo system can be applied.
That is what we're looking at here. It's an aerial combat system that's just been shoved into the right. Okay, stream of consciousness. Oh wait while I tell you about my aerial combat game. Right, there's a lot. There's maneuverability classes, class A to E, attack modes, and then and speed, of course, and then we get to a breakdown of each different types of flyers you might encounter: demons, devils, dinosaurs. Do we run out of D's? That's it.
Well, dragons covers an awful lot of ground there, I imagine.
Oh, then flying ships, of course. So, right, that took a turn. And there's charts for showing how different classes turn over hexes. There's a hex with some degrees marked in it for ease of use, conducting combat. Some magic items that might allow you to fly, and how you're going to use them. Right, that's Yep, that's a system just shoved in there.
Yeah, I will admit I skimmed over an awful lot of this just because it's an awful lot of rules.
It's a bunch of rules.
And I don't think they're particularly helpful.
They seem to be enough to cover the job at hand, but not perhaps enough to answer every question. That's why you're the GM. But it's impressive to find, it's the next 4 pages basically. Quite impressively sort of covering everything you can think of off the top of his head.
One of the points that comes to me is that all of a sudden we've gone from, we need enough special hex paper to maybe cover half the table, to we're now probably going to be rolling reams of the stuff around as our mounts have to suddenly do wide banking turns over hundreds of square feet of space. And I don't even think there's all that much about diving, or like a few of the monsters are listed as having special diving attacks, but there's not an awful lot about. It's still a 2D game, I'm pretty sure.
Well, I mean, you're sticking the flying rules in, the flying combat rules in the middle of another section. Probably don't have time to cover every dimension, but it's there. It's a whole thing, and it's the same. I think he kind of rolls over into Waterborne stuff in a fairly similar.
There's a minor section on like how firing arrows is harder
in the air. Yeah, okay.
And apparently, like it's even easier to dodge dragon breath when you're in the air. But also, like, why would you ever fight on the wing? Because apparently, if you take half your hit points in damage, you gotta land immediately, and if you take 3/4, you just crash. Apparently, 3/4 hit points is the point at which someone puts a hole in your wing, and you just kind of belly flop onto the ground, presumably losing all the rest of them.
Things are tough in the air. Unlike the land where you can fight your last hit point. Well, that's just the way it is.
Well, yeah, but it's one of those other things where, from a simulationist, standpoint, it's this interesting argument over like how much of your hit points is your physical integrity. But from a tactical standpoint, it really just means that, like, woe betide if your players have access to the DMG
verboten,
which the whatever warnings were at the first few pages. It was just like, we've got the dragon to half hit points, he must land, so saith the Gygax. And just like, at a certain point, you've just turned the wonderful, amazing thing of flight, the great gift of the sky gods, which you have spent an entire year training a griffin and feeding it horses to get the gift of flight.
You're really hung up on this, Matt. You just do not like the cultivation of griffins, do you? It's anathema to you.
No, it's a great idea. It's just
on paper.
It's a great idea on paper, but like,
to raise a griffin one must first become a horse rancher.
Yeah, kind of. It's just like, this sort of answers the question of why would the dragon ever land on the ground, be surrounded by warriors, when they could just take the air and just breathe at them forever? And the answer is because according to page 53 of the DMG, once they hit half hit points, they're just going to crash.
Well, I mean, it's the same for any high-risk combat maneuver. Don't get hit. That's the secret.
But this is D&D. Don't get hit isn't really an option because it's decided by dice rolls. Like, we're coming up in the combat section in about a dozen pages, and let me tell you there, the combat section is not friendly in ways to make not getting hit a viable option.
So I guess the other rule of combat is kill the other guy first. I mean, there's plenty of advantages to being in the air. In some fights you may not be able to engage without being in the air, so whether you go out at 0 hit points or 75% of your hit points gone is kind of immaterial. You're going up there with the plan of it happening to them before it happens to you. Just like every combat. Right, let's move on then, because there's worse things happen at sea, which is the next section.
Start off the Waterborne Investor section with a description of what different boat types are. Yeah, just your usual breakdown, usual reminder that warships are actually really bad in the ocean and you need a galley if you're going to go out onto the actual sea.
Yeah, they're more littoral craft, aren't they?
Yeah.
In history, at least. So I just want to point out, I may be misremembering some of this, but I'm looking at this section on warships and our general sailing stuff, and if you recall the Saltmarsh adventure book that they put out not so long ago, which was meant to, in its entirety, deal with all aspects of adventuring on the high seas in D&D 5th ed. And I gotta say, Saltmarsh is what, about 250 page book, something in that sort of realm?
Something like that, yeah.
The DMG, the first ed DMG, has about as much rules with about as much detail for this topic as the entirety of the Saltmarsh book. So while there isn't much here, it's about the same as what they bothered to put in a book that was meant to be entirely dedicated to the subject. I have real problems with the Saltmarsh book from the point of view of actually conducting any sort of adventure at sea, and the sparseness of the rules to cover the thing you're meant to be doing is one of them. So just wanted to kind of draw that parallel. Gary, off the top of his head, had about 4 pages of rules that about covers everything that the game designers managed to cover 40 years later. Probably a bit more. Excuse my French, that pisses me off.
The Saltmarsh book is a little conflicted in its objectives. It's just yet more old adventures updated to 5th ed, but also it's like what's supposed to be a section on water adventures, but it actually mostly turns out to be a bunch of underwater locations and some general vehicle rules.
They're not even vehicles. They treat, in 5th ed, I believe, that they treat vehicles like they're monsters now. They give them a stat block. It's bizarre.
Well, I mean, according to this, your average warship has somewhere between 7 and 42 hit points. It's just weird to see, like, if you don't read this section on rules, you get the impression that the warship has got less hit points than your average 5th level fighter.
Right, yeah.
Well, I've tried reading the damage rules. I think there's 3 different types of damage for boats. There's apparently their hull value, which is based on siege weapon damage, which I think is somewhere else in the book. But there's also burning damage, and then there's damage from spells. So I think if you fireball someone else's ship, you have to roll your fireball damage and then convert that into burning damage, and then you have to convert the burning damage into hull value damage. And
oh no. Yeah, like I said, they're not perfect rules. But at least they're accounting for the idea that ships are vulnerable to different things than, say, a monster of equivalent sizes. It's like, although in the clunkiest, most Gygaxian way possible. Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of speed rules, your chance to capsize in the storm, how long it takes a ship to burn down to the keel. Yeah, then there's a section on grappling a ship and boarding it. You know, put it all aboard to the sword. And such like.
Yeah, exactly how every naval combat should end, in a great big punch-up while the 2 ships are strapped together. It's like, that's the way you want it to go, right?
Well, it certainly is actually the medieval method. In fact, I'm not even sure that galleys were really a thing back. That's a very much a Renaissance sort of.
Well, the Romans pioneered the greatest innovation in naval warfare in their time. They weren't particularly good seamen, or they didn't have a particularly good navy. But when they went up against the Carthaginians, who were excellent, had a great port at Carthage, go look it up, it's amazing. Steal it for a campaign, it's a beautiful, cool thing. It's like the Death Star of naval ports. But I digress. I'm going to go back to my first digression. The Roman answer to this was, put great big spiked ramps on your ship, ram the enemy, and then start a land battle on the ships. They were the OG boredom and skewer and pirates, because they had absolutely no hope of winning regular naval engagements at the time. So they went, sod it. If we're going to settle the Punic Wars at sea, we're going to do it on land, as it were. Get them. Crow hooks, I believe they were called. They were ungainly things strapped to the front of Roman galleys, but they did the job. They knew what they were good at, the Romans, and they stuck to it, no matter what the milieu was. Right, so, and use that in your game.
And of course, the obligatory section to remind you that unless you're wearing magical armor, all armor will just immediately drag you to the bottom.
But have a potion of water breathing tucked under your cuirass.
Well, we would hope, but it's just weird because there's all these various rules to try to make heavy armor feel like a logistical choice.
Well, good, because it's a completely penaltyless go-to now. It's like, oh yeah, heavy armor. Just strap heavy armor on if you can, and you're fine. There's next to no downside for wearing it anymore. It should be a bloody liability in certain cases, especially when you're dealing with water. Famously, it'll kill you.
I get that, but the problem is that there's very little in the way of unarmored alternatives. There's no sort of, well, you've got your sea legs and you're trained in your boat, so you count as having a little bit of armor or defense. Again, I have no problem with saying that armor on a ship is a bad idea, but if you're going to have a nautical campaign, you should probably look into some house rules on alternatives to armor, because that's going to be important.
Or sometimes you just make choices to avoid a big penalty. And yes, you may in the course of things get stabbed a bit more often, but the big downside...
You get stabbed a lot more often. There's 8 points of...
Yeah, you will, sure. Well, that's the game. But the big downside of falling off a ship in full plate is that no one ever sees you again. Game over. So, do you suffer the slings and arrows and occasional bill hooks and definitely swords and rapiers? Maybe a pistol or crossbow shot of being lightly clad? Yes, you do. Bring plenty of healing potions and a cleric. But whatever you do, don't be the paladin who misses that one athletics check. We ain't seeing him again. That sometimes you're not picking another good replacement. You're simply foregoing the massive penalty of dying. That's the whole story of armor.
I can't really argue without talking about alternative game systems, and we're not really here to do that except for all the times we digress to do exactly that. So, although I will like to point out that this is this weird idea of you have to leave behind all your possessions, and all that'll be left for you is you in your skivvies with one unsheathed dagger, which may be carried between your teeth.
It's all gone a bit Jack London again.
And of course, a nice paragraph of naval terminology. And apparently the longest seam on the bottom of a wooden ship is called the devil. Which I did not know, and I'm not...
That's an interesting fact. We've all learned something new today. Yeah, why not? That's good. And it again, you can use this as a DM to pepper some NPCs talk with some convincing naval terms. See most Patrick O'Brien books.
We have rambled on quite a bit about...
Hold on. You can't leave the devil thing alone without going to the very next entry there, which is devil to pay, and a term we've probably all vaguely familiar with, which is caulking the seam of the same name, the devil. When this job is assigned, it is given to the ship's goof-off, and thus comes the expression, you will have the devil to pay. So, you've got a rough job or a rough penalty coming to you. The devil to pay. Love it.
But I think our endless digressions may have led us to the point where we may have to finish this episode.
I think we will. We'll probably come back to look at maybe the vagaries of underwater combat. There's a little bit about magic, but we'll kick off next episode, I think, with travel in the most interesting form of travel in D&D, travel in the known planes of existence, where we take travel not just multidimensional but multiplanar.
I'm gonna just shoot your enthusiasm. That's about a half page of text.
Damn. Okay. Well, we'll see you next time, folks. It'll start strong. So this has been another Tome of Gygax. Myself and Scarr. We are pulling apart the OG first edition of the Dungeon Master's Guide because, as Scarr convinced me, it is an endlessly fascinating document full of weirdness, author fiat, and general jank, and nuggets, seeds and nuggets and kernels of all the things that we most strongly associate with fantasy role-playing, but we're never quite sure where they came from, because, like the devil to pay.
It very much acts as this patient zero. And I do really think, like, for all I, endlessly rag on Gygax, I do really have this appreciation of just the boundless talking to you that he does. It's just like, this is the way, this is the path. And as much as I might disagree as a veteran DM myself, I can definitely see how people fell in love with this book. And to, swing back and apologise to Mr. Colville, his point that he keeps making, that this book really feels like it's telling you the way the world is. This is the truth of Dungeons and Dragons and the world of Greyhawk and so on and so forth. By reading this book, you're gaining insight into the great fantasy. It does really leak out of its pores, this idea that it's
secret knowledge imparted by a pioneer who's gone before. Well, look, it'd be very hard. It's very hard to convince someone if you sound uncertain, and there's a lot of certainty baked in on the original Dungeon Master's Guide, as penned by Gary Gygax. I hope wherever he is, he has a hex map of the way ahead. Well, look, we'll leave it there for now, shall we? I've been Savage Mick.
I've been Warlord Scarr.
And this has been another Tome of Gygax. We are the Adventuring Party. Find us on Discord, find us online, you can chase us down on Twitter, etc. Do we do the usual sign off for these?
Well,
who knows? Well, maybe we should go back, because as far as I know, this party is not yet over.
But the episode is. Thanks for listening to The Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventurePTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventureparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventureparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike on Version 3 license.